television, I did rather well, but in the smaller markets, it's really harder. But at the same time, it's not necessarily when you're first starting out, it's not necessarily about the money. It's about the opportunity of being able to get in there and learn your craft. I've mentored several local reporters here in the Kansas City area as well. First thing I tell them, go whether it's a small market, and then work your way back into the Kansas City area. And it's worked.
Who were some of the people that you mentored?
Sandra Olivas. Short story with her. She was working at a not-for-profit agency, and she had mentioned to me she wanted to go into this field. She had a background. She had a degree in journalism, just didn't know how to get her foot into the door. So she weathered into Topeka, and she became a great reporter down there. And she worked her way up into the Kansas City area, and she ended up at KCTV5 and worked there for about 15 years. She's just one of many that I've mentored over the years. But what I want to do is empower them. I want them to empower them to move forward and to encourage them. So that's my role that I play now. Sarah Plate is another one that I've also helped along the way as well. She's with Channel 41. She was also in the Topeka market, I believe, and we worked her way up into the Kansas City area.
That's great. Well, let's move on to the idea of founding a local Hispanic newspaper that was bilingual. There was one already in existence, but you felt that there was a need and a market. So tell us about that.
Back in 1996, I had given some thought about what I wanted to do after television, and I had already been in television 26 years. And the thing of it was, a couple of years before I decided to start a newspaper, I had to do some self-searching of myself, asking myself, okay, what do you want to do? And I thought about maybe going into real estate. I knew nothing about real estate. Then I thought, well, I'll go sell cars. I knew nothing about cars. So the only thing that I really knew was news. And so I felt as though I needed to take advantage of my experience and develop something there. And what frustrated me the most in television was the fact that they just didn't do it to me, but to a lot of the reporters, they would cut our stories down. If we wanted a minute 45, they would cut down to a minute 15. And sometimes I would go home and I watched my news story on the air, and it was like, I didn't do that story. That's not the story that I left behind. So that was a little frustrating. But I remember back in the days, back in the 90s, my news director would tell me, Joe, newscast these days is fast-paced. It's like building a car. General Motors, you go down there and they're cranking out those cars. Well, same thing with news these days. It's just cranking out those news stories. You don't have really a lot of time to go in depth. And that was one of the things that I think that the Kansas City area, and especially in the Latino community, was missing. So if you ever pick up a copy of Kansas City Hispanic News, you're going to find some long stories in there, because it's important that we tell the whole story, not just at the just surface. I want to be able to tell you the whole story. And so to me, that was very, very important. And it was one of the things that I did at television, was I was able to do some in-depth reporting. And one of those stories happened to be the Primo Garcia School, where I was able to do a 2-part series on that particular school and talk about what happened. And I was able to take that family back in time as to what had taken place back in those days, where, Primo Garcia and his brother was shot at Westport High School, was killed there, and then the community took my story, the 2-part story that I did, took it to the school board and convinced the school board to reconsider renaming the school, which is at 17th, basically at West Penway, to consider it being named after Primo Garcia. So this was one of the things that, the story did for them. The family always credits me with that, but in all honesty, I credit them because they shared that story. So, we in the media can make a difference, I believe, and that's one way that we were able to do that.
Yeah, I had the privilege of attending the 50th anniversary of the naming of the incident of the Primo Garcia. And I was very impressed, not only with your 2-part series, and then leads me to express how appreciative I have been over the years of your in-depth reporting. You're a news hound for sure.
Yes, I am. Yes,
and
I am.
That is very refreshing, because so often you just don't get those kinds of in-depth stories, and especially surrounding the Latino community, because the Latino community, for the most part, is a marginalized group in Kansas City. And I think it's important that other Hispanos, Hispanics, Latinos tell their stories, because if we don't, they won't get told. And so I've always appreciated the work that you do. But going back to Primo Garcia, I think one of the things that impressed me most was the teacher whose life was saved by Primotivo Garcia was there, and spoke, and her story was indeed powerful as she related what actually happened when Primotivo and his brother came to her rescue.
One other thing with that story was the fact that when we dedicated the school, when it first built, because of the community involvement that I've had over the years, we were able to arrange for TWA to fly her in from out of town. I believe she lived at that time in Phoenix, and they flew her and her daughter that she was carrying at that time when she was attacked. They flew them in, so she was there twice. Just to know that school is there, this is a great way to keep the memory and the spirit of Primotivo alive. So this is one of the things, again, going back to empowerment. We're empowering, our community. What's frustrating to me sometimes, and I've had these arguments with a lot of the local news directors here, is that sometimes television stations, they don't necessarily take the Latino market seriously to the point that they don't see them as a rating point or a share, so to speak, And so they need to do that, because so often, even when I was in television, the mentality was, well, if there's a story in the Latino community, how does it affect the folks out in Olathe? How does it affect the people, in Independence? But the thing of it is that they deserve news coverage as well. And that was another reason why I wanted to go ahead and go into the newspaper business. To be honest with you, when I first got into the newspaper business, I didn't have a clue as to how to do the layout. I didn't know the verbiage, the language. I remember talking to my editor one day, and I said, did you give me an idea of our story counts? What do we have? What are we teasing today? I was using TV lingo. I didn't know the print lingo. And then all of a sudden, about a year later, she was talking TV lingo, and I'm over here talking print lingo.
Yeah. Going back to the Primotivo Garcia story, one of the things that I found out was that the daughter that she was carrying when she came for the naming of the school was with her this second time, mm-hmm. and the child that the daughter had was named after Primotivo Garcia. That's good. That's an amazing human interest story.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many different things that took place with that particular school, and all just a wonderful story. And I'm just glad to be a part of it. I was honored to be a part of that.
Yeah. For our listening audience who may not know where Primotivo Garcia School is, tell us a little bit about its location.
Well, it was built about 30 years ago, and it's located between Summit and West Penway on Kansas City's west side.
On the 17th Street, isn't it?
On 17th Street. And if people know where Manny Rhodes Art Center's at, it's right across the street.
Yeah. And, for our listeners, the west side is a very historic place, not only for the Latino population, but for other populations that moved in and out of that community. So I would urge people who don't know about the Latino community to visit the West Side and the Guadalupe Center and other places where they can learn about the history of the Latino people, and especially Mexican-American, Mexican immigrants to the area. It's all part of Nuestra Herencia, our heritage. Joe, let's talk a little bit more about your wife's involvement with Casey Hispanic News. When you made that decision to go into the newspaper business, how did she feel about it?
Well, I had, I believe, about maybe 70% of her support. But when when she finally realized that I was serious about this, and I mean serious about this, like buying furniture and storing it in my garage and not allowing her to pull in her car because I had furniture in the garage, no office yet. I was started to buy some furniture and things that I needed for the future of Kansas City Hispanic News. And then when I went home and I mentioned to her that I had given my notice to resign from television, she said, "What?" And then she finally realized I was serious about going into the newspaper business. And it was scary for her and it was scary for me as well, because I thought I had a great idea, but what if it didn't work out? Well, fortunately for me, two things happened. One was when I announced that I was leaving Channel 4, my news director was also a mentor of mine. And he says, "Joe, you're not going anywhere yet." And what do you mean? I need to leave because I'm going to start. I didn't ask him. I told him I was starting Kansas City Hispanic News. And he says, "Well, we don't want you to leave yet. If you have to do both jobs, I want you to do that, but you're not leaving." So I stayed another year. And it was really a great for me because of the fact that it allowed me to grow my business within that first year. Because people think you may make money on stories, but no, it's about advertising. And so that was also very foreign to me, but I had to do that as well. So I stayed another year, and then finally I left in 1997. But the paper had started in 1996.
Yeah, and I think I had the privilege of being one of your early writers on
You were,
history.
yes, you were part of the staff there back in those days.
Yeah,
And the thing of it was, let's be honest here, Gene, you weren't getting paid, and for probably the first 6 months or so, no one was getting paid. But I had a great staff of people they believed in me, they believed in what I was trying to do, and they supported me. You were one of those folks.
Yeah, and I enjoyed it because it took me into my love of history and allowed me to deepen my interest and experience in telling our Nuestra Herencia, our history.
Right. Well, another thing, though, I do want to point out now, we're not just about history. We cover all sorts of news. And when people ask me that, and I always have to be blunt, and I say, we cover the good, the bad, and the ugly. Things that are going on today. We talk about feature stories. We talk about things that are not so good in our community, the violence, the crime, statistics that show that, the crime wave in our community. We also cover good news as well. So it's a mixture of stuff that we cover.
Well, in closing, Joe, what's in the future for you and Kansas City Hispanic News and your other endeavors?
Well, people are already asking me when am I going to retire, and I think that comes with age, but I'm not even thinking about retirement yet. I still think I got a good 3, 4, 5 more years to offer our readers more in-depth reporting. I'm having fun. I really enjoy what I do. As you mentioned earlier, I'm a news hound, and I could be at home and somebody calls me at 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the evening and say that there's something going on. Even between Christmas and New Year's, there was a vigil for a family that passed away, that were killed in KCK. I left my home and I went to cover it because that's just, I just can't sit there knowing that something is going on in our community and I'm not covering it. I can't be at everything, but I try to be at many different events as possible.
I want to thank you for joining us today on Nuestra Herencia. We appreciate not only the work that you've done in the past, but your insights into our history. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.